So I'll just introduce myself first of all, without repeating what Petronella has said too much. I have been working in international development for many years at this stage. I also work in Sierra Leone actually with a focus on health workers. I'm more interested in the technology that health workers might be able to use to reconfigure their practice, as opposed to Petronella's focus of the unsalaried and motivational aspect of why they do their work. I also have a project with Deepak, or with Professor Saxena, in looking at technology for sustainability across a number of different countries, namely Ireland, India, Uganda, Ethiopia, and Sierra Leone as well. So there's a number of different projects that I've been working in. I also have currently 3 PhD students who are all looking at topics in the Global South. You might see my background. I meant to change that actually. I might as well leave it there now. I'm part of the ADAPT Centre in Trinity College in Dublin. And I also work, as Petronella said, as a lecturer in SETU Carlow. Hence, hopefully I'll see some of you there tomorrow. So I might as well start, I think. Let me just see if I can share. Now, is everybody able to see my my presentation? Yeah. Okay, so the presentation will dovetail very nicely with Deepak's presentation, who follows me. Both of us have decided to really focus our presentation this morning on a paper that we've written, which I'll get to in a second, which arose out of the many years of work in the Global South that Deepak and I have been doing. And a conversation, I suppose, that happened about the difficulty of doing this kind of work from a whole range of different perspectives. I think this is actually really important, because if we do work in the Global South, or if we work in the broad sphere of international development, it is a difficult choice. I remember somebody saying to me many years ago in Trinity, would you not be better off doing work with Intel over in Leixlip? You know, you can just jump on the bus and get down to Intel whenever you want, and if you miss something, you can phone up somebody, you know, instead of trekking all the way to Sierra Leone, and it's expensive and it's difficult and all of this kind of stuff. So I think when we decide to do work in the Global South, we buy into a difficult piece of research. There's no doubt about that. It is much easier just to work on a research site or in a research area that's easier to access, with less cultural and political and social boundaries. And I think this whole topic sometimes gets a little bit lost in the whole conversation. So it's fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic to see a whole summer school devoted to this, and hopefully the speakers that you're going to hear over the next number of hours, all across the entire day, and again tomorrow, will all have something to say about this. I know Deepak is going to talk a little bit more about our project and the paper I'm going to reference now. I know Dorothy is going to talk about this in the afternoon, as is David Krebs, who's a specialist in Southern and Indigenous theory. So this is a really interesting day. I'm very much looking forward to the day and hearing about this quite important topic, I would say. So the paper, which really sort of I think is our first shot at opening up this discussion, is this one. I believe we did share this as part of the emails that went out to you when you registered. But if we didn't, you can just scan that QR code and that paper should be available. I hope my QR code works. If it doesn't, somebody can let me know. If the paper is behind a paywall, I probably shouldn't be saying this, but I'll just email either myself or Deepak and we'll send it to you, no problem. And I think it is an interesting paper. So a lot of the stuff I'm going to be talking about, and Deepak is going to talk about after me, will be based on our experiences in a number of different projects. And they're summarized quite nicely in this paper. So definitely, if you haven't had a chance to read that, can I recommend that you do, because it is an important paper, I think. We will hopefully work on an iteration of the paper over the next number of years as we do more work and we put some of this stuff into practice in the field. But as an initial stick in the sand, this I think is an interesting and important paper. So please do check it out if you haven't already. The other paper that I'm basing my talk on today is a paper I wrote a number of years ago at this stage. God, it's 5 years ago almost at this stage, with Richard Heeks from University of Manchester. This is also quite an important paper, I believe. Again, this one is open access because it's in the Electronic Journal of Information Systems in Developing Countries. So it's available to everybody. So again, if you scan that QR code, I hope it works. If it doesn't, let me know and I can send you the paper. And this is a paper which proposes that the philosophical approach of critical realism is highly appropriate for work in information and communications technology for development, ICT 4D. It's not only appropriate for ICT 4D, I would argue quite strongly that it's appropriate for any work where we're based in the global south, any work which has at its core emancipation, fairness, any kind of ethical considerations. Critical realism as a philosophical approach is brilliant for taking into account different social and cultural aspects and contexts. And its most important and most useful aspect, I would argue, is that it gives measurable and reproducible results. So if you, for example, if I did, and I know Deepak has used this extensively as well, maybe he can speak to this in a moment, but I used this particular approach in my work in Sierra Leone, and it got me a PhD, which was absolutely brilliant. But probably just as important as that, it gave World Vision and Irish Aid a roadmap for how they could reproduce a very successful mobile health implementation. And I think that is extremely important. If you are maybe a social scientist or an interpretivist, I think that's great. Absolutely, that's fantastic. But sometimes the results from a very heavy philosophical approach like structuration theory, it's brilliant. I'm a huge fan, but it's difficult to maybe reproduce that in practice if you're an NGO. Deepak, do you want to jump in and say something at that point? I know we're sort of tic-tacking here, but jump in if you want to. Do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, actually, I was thinking of pulling your critical realist back and ICT4D guy, perhaps bring him to the front.
Okay, yeah, that's no problem. But I do think it's important to read those two papers. Again, I would advise scanning, taking a look, and if you wanted to follow up with either myself or Deepak, we're very happy to provide any kind of email addresses or contact details. I love this quote. This is a quote from a guy called Matt Smith, who actually, his paper appeared in the same, if I just go back up here, actually, his paper, this is a special edition of EGI SDC. The paper where I've just taken this quote appears in the same special edition. So what he says is, if it appears that ICT4D or Global South-based research and social science research actually is simple, you are probably doing it wrong. And I can see Petronella smiling there coyly just out of the corner of my eye, so I'm sure she agrees with that wholeheartedly. And in brackets then at the end, or the research is at least incomplete. I couldn't agree with this more. I think I've seen this happen so many times. And as I keep saying, it's a difficult road to take. To conduct research in the Global South, to manage a project, to do a PhD based in that geographical area is a really, really difficult thing. It's much more difficult than a PhD that's not based in the Global South. So I think that if any of you are writing something at the moment, or if you are in the middle of a PhD piece of research, that's a very nice quote that you can include because it's true. And the more projects I do, the more I work with my own PhD students and postdocs, the more I just absolutely appreciate that is absolutely 100% true. this is a direct quote from Deepak's and my own paper. I'll just read the full thing. Data collection in resource-constrained environments, particularly the Global South, is challenging for a variety of philosophical, theoretical, methodological, and really importantly, ethical reasons. And again, that's a nice quote that perhaps you might be able to use in a piece of writing. And again, extremely true. It just is, I mean, I would argue quite strongly that it is not appropriate in all cases to use predominantly Western or global North developed approaches to philosophy, to theory, to methodology, and again, very importantly, our own ethical standards that we have here in the global North in nice, comfortable countries like Ireland, UK, Europe, US, where a lot of these big, heavy, predominantly academic, philosophical and theoretical approaches have been developed, and take them and apply them in a country like Sierra Leone. It just doesn't work. You can do it, but really, I think it misses the point to a certain extent. If we take something that's been developed by academics just like me, or like Deepak, or like Petronella, we can't step outside of our own social and cultural contexts. It's very, very difficult. I'm going to talk more about this in a second, but it's extremely difficult for us to step out of our own social, cultural, and ethical contexts. So what I believe is ethical, I have my own beliefs, as we all do, that'll apply to me. It might apply more broadly across Ireland, or maybe Europe, or maybe the US, but it certainly doesn't translate seamlessly to a country like Sierra Leone, for example, where beliefs and ethical approaches might be quite different. So we have to be aware of that. And I think we also have to be aware that many of the approaches that we use are developed in the global North, and they just don't translate very easily. So we're looking at a few different things here. This is really, I suppose, the way I would summarize this. So the challenges associated with research in the global South are definitely practical. There's a lot of practical challenges. Actually, again, anyone who does this knows about this. We have to organize visas, we have to organize vaccinations, we have to sometimes get in-country support. Really difficult to hire somebody in country. I went through this with one of my PhD students 2 years ago, and the amount of trouble our institution gave us, the amount of red tape, the amount of difficulty to actually hire a research assistant in Sierra Leone was unbelievable. I would be reluctant to go down that route again. Actually, it's just really, really, really difficult. So there's lots and lots of practical challenges. On top of that, there can be huge social, cultural, and political differences. Differences to, again, I'm going to speak about this more in a second, but differences in attitudes towards research, differences in attitudes towards data collection, data security, broader social and cultural beliefs. It's very, very different. And I think it's okay if you're originally from Africa. My PhD student is from Nigeria. He was working in Sierra Leone. So it isn't as much of a cultural and social shift as I would have working in Sierra Leone, but still it is different, even within different regions of West Africa. There's financial considerations. So it's expensive. To plan a project in Rajasthan, in Uganda, in Ethiopia, it is expensive to get there and to actually stay there in the field for a number of months, to hire people. So all of this is something that makes it more difficult, that makes it more challenging. As I've mentioned just a moment ago, there's philosophical, theoretical, and methodological considerations. I know Deepak is going to speak about this, as is David Krebs. So there's a very, very strong argument to say that we should have a look at Southern-based theory. So what kind of philosophy and theory is being used in African universities, for example? What kind of philosophical approaches and methodological approaches have originated from the parts of the world where we want to research? again, David will speak about this later on, but maybe approaches like Ubuntu, for example, aren't very frequently used in the global north, but they're perfectly valid. Approaches like that, I think we need to see more of them in our work, and I think they're absolutely 100% perfectly valid to use in our work. And the big one, which unfortunately I won't really get a chance to talk about a lot this morning, but the big one to me is ethical challenges and ethical frameworks, of which there is a complete lack. So how, and again, I won't go down this route because I'll end up talking for the whole talk about this if Petronella lets me, so I won't. But how do we know that our research is ethical? There's bound to be huge power differences between us as global north-based researchers, or Deepak, who's actually Indian and based in India, but has the title of professor. So when we're talking to our research participants, there's a huge power differential. And sometimes what may happen will be that because that we hold positions of respect, we hold positions of power. So sometimes people will tell us what we want to hear. And also, sometimes I really do battle with this, actually. I just wonder, is the work that we do ethical? We go to countries like Sierra Leone, we do an awful lot of work there. We take up the precious time of CHWs and NGOs, and we produce wonderful pieces of paper which give us PhDs and give us H-index and give us publications. But what do they get from this? What do our participants get? We would like, and I'm sure many people here would want to do research that has impact. Certainly, I know I do. I know Petronella and Deepak do as well. I'm sure everybody does. But does the research really have impact? Does it change the lives of the people who we are actually working with? So there's a huge amount of ethical questions in working in the Global South, I believe. And a very huge lack of frameworks in which to judge our ethical participation in projects like this. So, huge challenge.
Sorry, PJ, just wanted to give them one example before you leave that slide. Can you go back?
Yeah, there you go.
So of course, like being, and as PJ already mentioned, so being, say, being a researcher from West and then going to Global South or other contexts, yes, there is a power differential and lack of understanding of the context many times. But even when you are from the same region, still there will be some socio-cultural changes. So for instance, in one of my projects, I interviewed scientists working in Indian organizations. And because of the culture for deference to your superior, they will not talk openly, and certainly not if you want to record. So if you don't record, if you rely on notes, so it gives them plausible deniability, but recording does not give them. So that could be a problem. Another problem one of my colleagues faced, so he researched on business communities, and he did an ethnographic study. So, and in which he found that, okay, wives, so basically females of the family also play a major role in supporting the business. So, but he couldn't talk to them despite being from the same region. So in this case, he actually trained his wife, and his wife actually went and spoke to those ladies. So even when you are from the same society, still there are a lot of issues there. Sorry to interrupt you, PJ, but I just want to
Deepak, that's great. Please do jump in. That was a really valuable contribution. Thank you so much. But by the way, if anybody else wants to jump in, just do. We will have time for questions at the end, but if anybody wants to stick up their hand, I have my full screen here, but Petronella will give me a heads up if anyone wants to ask a question, or if you just want to jump in, then please do. There's no problem with that. It's interesting Deepak said that, because I'm just reminded now actually of this is going back at maybe about 10 or 12 years. I was working on a project with a good friend of mine, and we were in Kerala in southern India. So those of you who have been to Kerala, it's a really beautiful part of India. So we were there on the first night. It was actually our second trip there. So this was a return trip. We went there on our very first night there. He decided that we'd go down to the beach and we'd eat in this restaurant, and he decided to have some lobster. So I was looking at him and I was thinking, are you sure that's a good idea? So he said, yeah, it's great. You know, we've been here loads of times. Sure, we've been all over the place, and you know, it's grand. So he got sick from eating the lobster. He got sick and he spent 10 days in bed. The entire trip was completely written off. So again, that can happen in Ireland. It can happen in Europe. I get that. But when you have limited time and when you go to a place that's quite far away and quite expensive to get to, you don't want to spend your entire time there in bed. So again, these are, I would probably put that one under the practical difficulties, and finding innovative, outside the box kind of approaches, like training your wife, like Deepak said. That's a brilliant idea, I think. So just let me move on. Yeah. So there are huge challenges here, I think, which we're all aware of. And again, this morning, I probably haven't said anything groundbreaking. I think everyone here on the call in the meeting sort of knows mostly what I've been talking about. So probably no surprises there. But there are huge opportunities here as well. I think if we get this right, we can have huge impact. The work that we do, I mean, obviously, I think it's very important work. It's serving the poorest people on the planet. It's serving people who are in very low resource environments. And we have a real opportunity to improve health systems, to improve education systems, to make discoveries in the fields of sustainability, perhaps, that we haven't thought of here in the global north. So we have huge opportunities for impact. So if we can get this right, it is really worthwhile doing, I think. So maybe the next 10 minutes, I'll just talk about maybe perhaps how we could do that. One of the pictures that you'll always see in presentations like this is this one. So this is a really wonderful picture. I had it as my screensaver for many years, actually, because it's a picture that shows the planet at nighttime and where all the lights are. So you often see people talk about this, like my good friend Gianluca Mosconi from UCD, who wrote a paper a few years ago where he said knowledge is like light, and he used this image as well. Weightless and intangible. It can easily travel the world, enlightening the lives of people everywhere, yet billions of people still live in the darkness of poverty unnecessarily. So if you look at where the light is, that's where the money is. That's where the wealth is. That's where the privilege is. That's where the resources are. Now I know Australia is a little bit dark, maybe, but if you just ignore that for a minute, if you look at the areas of the world, maybe Africa is the one that jumps out there in the center of the picture. If you look at those areas, perhaps those areas are areas where we need to bring light. Now, bear with me. I'm going to backtrack on this spectacularly now in just a second. So this is an interesting one. This is an interesting picture. And I always put it up when I'm giving a talk like this. I always use this picture, and I always use that quote. Now, I want you to think about that for a second. I'm going to come back to it in a second, but I want you to think about this just for a second. Is it our job to bring light into those dark areas? Is it our job? Is this why you're doing this? Is this why you're here this morning? Are you looking at that map and thinking, yeah, I can bring light in there. I can bring knowledge. I can have impact. I can do something in there. If it is, hold that thought for just a second. I'm going to come back to that. So I suppose what I would always say is that technology, in particular, in the field of ICT 4D, plus innovation, gives us the power to transform and reconfigure. But the problem is, how do we do this? So one or two quick projects here I'll just mention. There's a project called Peak Vision, which uses mobile phones to detect to detect problems with people's eyes. So that's a really interesting project. It uses the camera in a regular mobile phone just to look into the back of somebody's eye. You can give that mobile phone to a community health worker, and he or she can do that in the field. That image can be uploaded to the cloud and analyzed by an expert who could be in Trinity, who could be in Tokyo, who could be in New York. So interesting project. Another interesting project is called Butterfly IQ Ultrasound. This is a device which costs about $100. It hooks up to a mobile phone and it does an ultrasound. Isn't that crazy? And again, imagine putting that in the hands of a CHW who is able to show a pregnant mother in the south part of Sierra Leone, down on the Liberian border, her unborn child in the womb. That's an incredible piece of tech. Again, the idea there would be that the CHW doesn't have the skill to interpret that image, but the image would be uploaded to the cloud, and somebody in a hospital or a university somewhere else could take a look. So these are the kind of things that we can do. This is the kind of impact we can have. It's incredible what we can do. But the problem is that it's very, very difficult, because these technologies are invented by us in the global north, and they sometimes don't translate. Just like theory, just like methodology, just like philosophy, it's a global north originating piece of technology or piece of philosophy, and it doesn't necessarily transfer. So in this field, it's actually very, very difficult. I know myself and Deepak have been working in this for years, I should say, and it's really hard to actually get these projects up and running and working. It's very, very, very difficult. And Richard Heeks would say that most of these projects fail or underachieve, and he gives a percentage of 85% of these projects that have been implemented, tech projects in the global south, 85% of them just fall apart very, very quickly, which is a shocking statistic. 85% of projects don't actually work as they're meant to. There are reasons for this. It's never because of the technology. So it's always because of these socio-technical reasons. Now, this is about technology, and I'll read through these two quotes, but I want you to think about philosophy and theory as I'm reading here. So just swap in philosophy, theory, ethics, one of those words, for technology in these quotes, and it applies just as equally. So the assumption that technology designed in the global north can be simply dropped into a developing country and be expected to work has been described as fallacy. Fallacy, and I couldn't agree more with that. That's from Shozi in her paper of 2012. And Sandeep Saha and work coming out of University of Oslo is the next quote, and it says, all technology, again, philosophy, methodology, ethics, is embedded in a social and cultural context. The transfer is not neutral. It's never neutral and value-free, as it imposes those values on the recipient, along with the objective commodities. So this is actually a very, very important slide. And I think that I think that my own practice really, this is at the core of exactly everything that I try to do. You can't transfer technology, you can't transfer ethical or philosophical frameworks that have been developed by people that have a completely different social and cultural context and expect them to work in a different country, particularly if it's a global south country. It just doesn't ever work. It never works. I'll go through these next slides quite fast because I'm just conscious of time and I want to finish in the next few minutes. So an example would be an iPhone. This iPhone is designed by people just like me, probably, actually, and we design it to fit into our own contexts with our own notions of how work should happen and how things like meetings should occur. That's great for me. It doesn't work like that across the rest of the world. One of the things which is quite interesting as well is that if you have calluses on your hands, I'm not sure the last time I had a callus on my hand. I think I had one last year when I dug a hole out my back garden. So we don't normally have calluses. But if you do have a callus, a phone like this doesn't work because the touch a screen, it's like wearing gloves. So to touch a screen on an iPhone, you need a piece of skin that's actually alive that conducts electricity. So if you give an iPhone to a farmer in Vietnam, for example, who has very hard hands from a lifetime of hard work, it's unlikely that that farmer will be able to use the phone because it just won't work. And he'll come back and say the phone doesn't work. A much more appropriate phone would be something like this. Now, again, I'm not saying that we should keep our iPhones in the global north, never give them to the global south. I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying we do have to think of social and cultural context. So a phone like this one may be much more appropriate to a project with CHWs or a project with Vietnamese farmers. Also, devices like this, these Amazon and Google are currently looking very vigorously actually at how to make these devices more appropriate to countries that are getting wealthier, that have very big increasing populations. For example, in West Africa, these devices are totally unsuitable at the moment for those kinds of contexts. Everything about them just doesn't work in a place like West Africa. So it's all about making these socially and culturally appropriate for companies like Amazon and Google. And also devices like this. This is the Facebook glasses, which are horrific. Some of you might have seen these, but these are Ray-Ban glasses that Facebook actually, this is a real product, by the way, that Facebook have, where you get to wear these lovely Ray-Ban glasses and they actually film your entire life. Imagine talking to somebody who's wearing those glasses. It would, to me, that would be absolutely awful. I'll just skip over that. Now, I'm just going to finish in the next 2 minutes by quoting one of my favorite parts of one of my favorite books. So just read this with me. Don't flick ahead too much. So this is from a book called Hearts of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. This book turned into the movie Apocalypse Now, if anybody knows that movie. Brilliant movie. So this is a little section from that. Just read it with me. I was going to take charge of a 2-penny, halfpenny river steamboat with a penny whistle attached. It appeared, however, I was also one of the workers, with a capital, you know. Now, just to give you context, this is written by an English guy who's going into Africa to make his fortune in the 1800s, just at the point of colonization. So he was on a little boat. He was traveling from England, from London, down to West Africa, and he was gonna try to make his fortune in these new worlds. So he looked on himself as something like an emissary of light. Very important phrase. Something like a lower sort of apostle. There had been a lot of such rot let loose in print and talk just about that time. And the excellent woman, Marlowe's aunt, living right in the rush of all that humbug, got carried off her feet. She talked about weaning those ignorant millions from their horrid ways, until, upon my word, she made me feel quite uncomfortable. Now, this is really interesting because the people who were colonizing the world 200 years ago, I think many of them did look on themselves as emissaries of light. They looked on themselves as civilized, and they were going to go to the countries they were colonizing and take their resources, yes, but they were also going to, in big inverted commas, civilize these people. So sometimes I think, if I'm being devil's advocate here, sometimes I think those of us who work in global development sometimes have a little bit of that. Now, again, I'm being devil's advocate here. I don't really believe this, but sometimes I think the system is sort of set up to make us emissaries of light. We have all of the knowledge. We're the experts. We're called doctor. We're called professor. We know about these things. We know what works. We know how to fix what's broken. So this puts a whole new context on this then, doesn't it? So should we be emissaries of light? Should we be bringing light into these areas of darkness? Is that what we do? Is that the way you look in yourself? And if we do, how are we going to do it? Are we going to bring our wonderful Western philosophies, our incredibly advanced Western theories and global North notions of structuration theory, institutional theory, actor network, all of these brilliant things? Are we going to bring those down to somebody in Sierra Leone and say, you know what, I'm an expert in this. I know how to do this, so let's do it my way. Is that what we're going to do? Or should we be looking at indigenous theories and looking at what we can learn as researchers from those areas that are in darkness? Now, I have been devil's advocate there. I'm just sort of putting it out there, maybe to keep in the back of your head throughout the course of the day. I know Deepak is going to talk a little bit more about this in the next few seconds. So I do think these socio-technical approaches have to be approaches that we consider. And just to finish on this slide, and I think that we have to contextualize our research. So this is what I want you to keep in mind throughout the rest of the talks and the rest of the speakers. Definitely consider Southern theory, indigenous theory. David Krebs will talk a lot about that. Deepak is going to talk now more about research methods and research philosophies. Think about those. Think about how appropriate they are. Think about maybe giving the iPhone to a Vietnamese farmer. It just doesn't work. It's just not going to work because it's designed by people like us. And also always put to the center of your work ethical frameworks, and keep asking yourself, is what I'm doing the right thing to do? Okay, and I think I'll finish on that. Sorry, Petronella, I've broken my own golden rule there. I have run over time, but we have at least a few minutes for questions, I hope.
Thank you very much, PJ. That was great, great talk, and great to kick us off with lots of interesting food for thought. So we have 10 minutes until we welcome our next speaker, who's already made a few contributions. So it'll be a nice, interesting kind of follow-up nearly. Does anyone want to, does anyone have any questions for PJ? Want to add something? Want to share something that's relevant to PJ's presentation?
I just want to say, if it's a really difficult question, Deepak's going to have to answer it. I'll take all the easy questions.
That sounds good. Anyone there? Catherine? Yeah, you have to unmute yourself. Sorry, I think that's okay.
Hi, PJ. Thank you very much for that. And congratulations on organising the school. I know how difficult it is from experience last year, so well done. I'm just very interested in, in terms of what you're saying about applying different research frameworks and, bringing a different, more empathetic, I suppose, set of values to the research project. I wonder, do you have an example from your practice in terms of when you were working in Sierra Leone, of how you adapted a framework you were using to a different context, or used a different kind of methodology?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm conscious now Petronella is actually doing this in Sierra Leone as we speak, this very minute, and Deepak is working on this in our sustainability project in Rajasthan. But just a bit, so if you guys want to jump in, please do. But what I'll just say briefly is, I adopted an extremely socio-cultural approach. So when we were designing technology in Sierra Leone for the mobile health project for the CHWs, we took huge amounts of care to build in socially and culturally appropriate images, language, cultural practices. It took a very, very long time to get to know exactly how the CHWs worked and what they did, what they thought was important, not what I thought was important, but just spending a long, long time just trying to figure out how they worked and what they did. And nudging and adjusting all kinds of philosophical and methodological frameworks around that. And I'm just conscious, Petronella, sorry, Petronella, I'm dragging you in here now to this, but I know you're doing it, and Deepak as well. Do you guys want to jump in?
Maybe I could just say, just very briefly about my my research. My research is about unsalaried health workers in Sierra Leone. And I think one of the things that that I would be looking at very carefully is interviewing lots of health workers and being at least very open, understanding and cognizant of the fact that people have to make quite unethical choices sometimes in their own work in order to survive. And I think sort of being able to well, I guess kind of trying to really be open about that as much as possible, and trying to kind of read plenty of and kind of really bring an understanding of that situation and understanding of people's challenges and being kind of humble about the situation that people find themselves in, I think is always a good starting point. I think kind of, yeah, for myself, I think it's important sometimes to document your own kind of standpoint as a researcher before you kind of start your research, in order to even kind of be able to reread your own standpoint and kind of and critically appraise it, or maybe share it with other colleagues, in order to really understand if, like, if you're not bringing too many prejudices to the country where you're going to conduct your research. So that, I guess, kind of a certain amount of kind of internal kind of checking and being really reflective of your own prejudices and the reading that you've done, and kind of the assumptions that you bring as you conduct your research, I think is really important.
Yeah. I think we have a question from Sanjeev. Yeah, Sanjeev, go ahead.
Okay. My question is, how do we validate whether the study population or the community we are working with really needs a technology intervention? The reason I'm asking this is there was an incident probably 3 years back when we visited, one of my friend and his group visited for a company called Celco. The Celco actually tries to bring solar access to energy to diverse pop communities. Could be shepherd, could be livelihood, for any livelihood or whatever it is. Now they actually went to a tribal community in one of the forests, and they offered them basically that we can bring in access to energy to them. The leader of the tribal community said, we don't want energy, because today when we are at 7, we go back to bed. Our life is simple. We wake up at 5 in the morning when the light is up. So our life is 6 to 7, and we have a wonderful cycle of life. The moment we bring in light, I'm going to stay up more. I'm going to read or watch or whatever it is. I'm going to stay up till 10 in the night. I'm not going to wake up at 5 in the morning. So you're kind of altering my actual daily routine. By doing that, probably you're going to bring in other kind of medical, conditions like diabetes or BP or sleeplessness or whatever it is. Now, so what we came back with that, because this access to energy project did have a very good traction in places like Shepherd community in North Karnataka. It had tractions in villages and rural communities to set up, photocopier machines or phones or even whatever it is through solar power and refrigerators. But when it came to this, a different community completely, we were just sent back, and we really found out that that's true, right? Now, there are 2 ways of doing it. One is we go to the community, get the data, get really, the feedback and come back. And with that, one single feedback is applicable across multiple tribal communities. Will it work out? Number one. Number two, is it possible for us to do, a first level analysis even before getting to the community, whether we should even bring technology into the community or not, or what would suit to them? That's my question. So because this came in because you pointed the word emissary of light. So it just struck me when we were taking light to them, they said, we don't need light from you. So that's my question.
That's a really great question, Sanjeev. Thank you so much. That's a brilliant question. And I think in part you actually answered it a little bit of it yourself. I'm going to get Deepak just to speak briefly about this, because this is actually what we've been discovering on the project that we're working on at the moment. It's about sustainability, locally, socially, culturally appropriate solutions to sustainability. And I believe for many years that technology was the solution to everything. I mean, it's the default solution. How do we do this? Let's build an app to do it. Everybody has mobile phones. That's the way we solve things. But I've become very techno-pessimistic recently. And I think that one of the things that absolutely shocked me a little bit was across Ethiopia, Uganda, Rajasthan, Sierra Leone, the most impactful and the most innovative solutions to sustainability don't involve any digital technology whatsoever. Deepak, do you want to step in and talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so actually I was going to cover that in my talk itself. So if you want to finish your answer, and then maybe we'll continue with my talk, because that's where you finished and my talk starts actually.
Okay, perfect. But yeah, Sanjeev, I think in a way you answered the question yourself a little bit. I think just going in, Petronella spoke to this as well. I think just going into these contexts and these projects with a very open mind, realizing that maybe bringing light, as you so very well spoke about, is not improving somebody's situation just because we would want light here. Just to realize that giving somebody a 5G mobile connection or giving them a smartphone that's very advanced and very fast, again, just because I would want that doesn't mean everybody else in the world would want it. And I'm not sure even if that makes my life better or worse. Last night I was sitting just watching TV, and there's emails coming in on my phone, and I'm saying ignore the emails, ignore them, and I'll just take a quick look, and then at 11 o'clock at night, you're doing emails. So is that an improvement in my life? Definitely not. Definitely not. So I think just to be more aware of social and cultural context, have that at the forefront of any intervention. And yeah, do some of the stuff that you said, and Deepak will speak more about that in just a second.
Thank you.
Sorry, before you move on, can I also just say one little thing just to Sanjeev? This is a really, really interesting conundrum. And I think what's most important is when you discuss this with the community that you're working with, or that you're planning to work with, you're already working with, that you're also really cognizant about who within the community you talk to. And again, you find that certainly as researchers, whether you're from the global north or from the global south, there's often this this kind of divide. And kind of as researchers, we often get talked, we often get sort of we often end up making connections with gatekeepers, with the people who represent, who appoint themselves or have been appointed as representatives of the whole community. And that's not, those individuals, even though they might be assigned that role, they do not always actually represent the viewpoints of every single citizen, every single person within that community. So I'm thinking in the case of you working with certain communities, while on the one hand you might feel that you don't want to deprive a particular group of their way of life, there may be people within that community who are very keen on the technology that you are bringing, and certain people who feel that they've been excluded from lots of opportunities because of the lack of electricity or the lack of internet that they've experienced. So I think while I don't think there's any right answer for this conundrum, I think what's really important is that you're very cognizant of whose opinions you go with, and that you realize that even though you might be talking to people who call themselves the representatives of communities, they don't always represent everyone's viewpoint. And I think it's just really important to bear that in mind. Talk to people who are much younger, who may not have the same the same gravitas, the same standing in the community. Talk to females in communities, because again, they may have very different ideas. So I think that's just one thing to bear in mind.
Got it. Thanks.
It's 3 minutes past 11, so I think it's a good moment to move on to Deepak. Welcome. Thanks for joining us once again, and please feel free to start your talk.